Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're talking about the death of the former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, who died Saturday after 8 years in a coma. He was 85 years old. We are joined by Professor Noam Chomsky in Massachusetts, by Avi Shleim, the Israeli historian at Oxford University in Britain, and we're joined here in New York by Rashid Khalidi. Among his books are Brokers of Deceit, How the U.S. Has Undermined Peace in the Middle East. He's the Edward Said Professor of Arab Studies at Columbia University. You are also Palestinian. Your response to the death of Ariel Sharon?
Well, for me, the most important emotion is a sense of finally the man who carried out a war in which 20,000 people were killed, the Lebanon War of 1982, who besieged Beirut, who destroyed building after building, killing scores of civilians in a search to destroy the PLO leadership, has finally left the world. I was in Beirut that summer of 1982, and to me it's horrific to watch the hagiographies that are being produced by people like Vice President Biden, by the New York Times, by much of the media, about a man who really should have ended his days at The Hague before the International Criminal Court. He was a man who, from the very beginning of his career, started out killing people. As the commander of Unit 101, he was the man who ordered the Qibya massacre.
Explain, what is Unit 101?
Unit 101 was a military unit of the Israeli army formed at the orders of the Israeli leadership of the time to carry out savage reprisal raids, but we're talking about dozens of victims in retaliation for, in this case, 2 or 3 people being killed. 69 people had their homes blown up over their heads.
When was this?
This was 1953 in a small village in what is today the West Bank. This was the first condemnation of Israel by a Security Council resolution. This was something that the United States at that time was willing to say was a horrible, horrible crime. And this is a man who, since then, really has only acted on the basis of a belief that force is the only thing the Arabs understand. The idea that he is now considered by some to be a peacemaker is grotesque, frankly.
Noam Chomsky, you wrote The Fateful Triangle in response to what happened in Lebanon. It changed the discourse for many in this country. First, explain your reaction to the death of Ariel Sharon and what we should understand about him.
Well, you know, there is a convention that you're not supposed to speak ill of the recently dead, which unfortunately imposes a kind of a vow of silence because there's nothing else to say. There's nothing good to say. What Rashid and Avi Shleim have said is exactly accurate. He was a brutal killer. He had one fixed idea in mind which drove him all his life. A greater Israel, as powerful as possible, as few Palestinians as possible. They should somehow disappear. And an Israel which could be powerful enough to dominate the region. The Lebanon War, which is his worst crime, also had a goal of imposing a client state in Lebanon, a Maronite client state. And these were the driving forces of his life. The idea that the Gaza evacuation was a controversial step for peace is almost farcical. By 2005, Gaza had been devastated, and he played a large role in that. The Israeli hawks could understand easily that it made no sense to keep a few thousand Israeli settlers in Gaza using a very large percentage of its land and scarce water with a huge IDF, Israeli army contingent, to protect them. What made more sense was to take them out and place them in the West Bank or the Golan Heights, illegal. It could have been done very simply. They could have, the Israeli army could have announced that on August 1st they're leaving Gaza, in which case the settlers would have piled into the trucks that were provided to them world that there cannot be any further evacuations. The farce was a successful public relations effort. Joseph Biden's comments illustrate that. It was particularly farcical when you recognize that it was a virtual replay of what happened in 1982 when Israel was compelled to withdraw from the Egyptian Sinai and carried out an operation that the Israeli press ridiculed as Operation National Trauma 1982. We have to show the world how much we're suffering by carrying out an action that will benefit our power and our security. And that was the peacemaking effort. But his career is one of unremitting brutality, dedication to the fixed idea of his life. He doubtless showed courage and commitment to pursuing this ideal, which is an ugly and horrific one.
Avi Shleim, go back to 1982 and what happened in Lebanon. First, where were you?
In 1982, Ariel Sharon was defense minister in Menachem Begin's government, and he was the architect of the invasion of Lebanon. And it was a war of deception because Sharon tricked his cabinet colleagues into launching this operation by pretending the aims were very limited, whereas in fact he had a big plan to completely change the geopolitics of the region, to create a new order in Lebanon, but by helping Israel's Maronite Christian allies to come to power in Lebanon and then sign a peace treaty with Israel, then to expel the Syrian forces from Lebanon, and to replace Syrian with Israeli hegemony in the Levant. This war of deception ended in tears. It didn't achieve any of its grandiose geopolitical objectives, and it ended also with the massacre in the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila. There was an Israeli commission of inquiry which found Defense Minister Sharon as responsible for failing to prevent the massacre of the Palestinian refugees by Israel's Christian allies. And Sharon was forced to step down. He was fired as Minister of Defense. And no one could have guessed at that time how a man who was found unfit to serve as Minister of Defense would bounce back as Israel's Prime Minister. But this is all of a piece in Sharon's career as a soldier and as a politician, because, as Professor Khalidi pointed out, Sharon committed his first war crime as a young major in 1953 when he destroyed many houses in the Jordanian village of Kibya, and he was responsible for the massacre of 69 civilians. So that was his first war crime, but it was not to be his last. And the consistent thread in his career as a soldier and as a politician was to use brute force, not just against the regular armies of the Arab states, but also against Palestinian civilians. And the other consistent thread is to shun diplomacy and to rely on brute force to impose Israeli hegemony on the entire region. President George W. Bush famously called Sharon a man of peace. Sharon was nothing of the sort. He was a man of war through and through, and he called his autobiography Warrior, not Diplomat. His approach to diplomacy reversed Clausewitz's dictum. For Sharon, diplomacy was the pursuit of war by other means. For the last 40 years, the Arab-Israeli conflict has been my main research interest, and I can honestly say that I have never come across a single scintilla of evidence to support the notion of Sharon as a man of peace.
I wanted to go back to 1982, the commission report you referred to, Avi Shleim, and ask Noam Chomsky about the Kahan Commission and what it is they found and how it is that Ariel Sharon actually survived politically beyond that.
Well, the Kahan Commission did condemn Sharon for what they called indirect responsibility for the Sabra Shatila massacre. The Kahan Commission, I think, was really a whitewash. It tried to give as soft as possible an interpretation of what was, in fact, a horrifying massacre, actually one that should resonate with people who are familiar with Jewish history. It was almost a replica of the Kishinev massacre in pre-First World War Russia. One of the worst atrocities in Israeli memory. It led to a famous nationalist poem by the main Israeli poet, Chaim Nachman Bialik, City of Killing. The Tsar's army had surrounded this town and allowed the people within it to rampage, killing Jews for 3 days. They killed 45 people. That's pretty much what happened in Sabra Shatila. Israeli army surrounded it, sent in the phalangist forces who were obviously bent on murder.
These were the Lebanese Christian forces.
Lebanese Christian terrorist force allied with Israel. The soldiers watched. They illuminated it. They helped them enter. They watched for several days while they murdered not 45 people, but somewhere Israel claims 800. Other analyses go up to several thousand. That's the Sabra Shatila massacre. The idea that Sharon had indirect responsibility. The Tsar, incidentally, was bitterly condemned internationally for direct responsibility. That's, in fact, one of the events that set off the huge flow of refugees from Eastern Europe, including my father, among others. So this was a kind of a replica, except far more brutal and vicious. And Sharon escaped more than a mild censure. It's true that he was removed as defense minister, but it wasn't long before he came back. That's one of a number of extremely shocking incidents in his career.
I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily, independent, global grassroots news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org today. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.